A millionaire abandoned his 5-year-old deaf-mute son on a deserted road. 20 years later, a man suddenly appeared and shouted, "Dad!" The millionaire nearly fainted upon hearing that. The chandeliers cast an ethereal glow across the marble floors of the Thompson mansion, their crystalline beauty a stark contrast to the emptiness that permeated the vast halls. Alexander Thompson stood before the floor-to-ceiling window of his study, his weathered reflection ghosting against the panoramic view of San Francisco's skyline. At 60, his once striking features had softened with age, though his steel gray eyes retained their characteristic intensity. His fingers traced the edge of an old photograph hidden in his desk drawer, the last reminder of a choice made 2 decades ago. The image showed a small boy with bright eyes and an innocent smile. Frozen in time at age 5, Alexander quickly shut the drawer, as if the mere sight of the photograph burned his conscience. The preparations for tonight's gala were in full swing. Servants bustled through the mansion's corridors, arranging flowers, polishing silverware, and transforming the grand ballroom into a spectacle worthy of San Francisco's elite. This event wasn't just another social gathering. It was Alexander's attempt to reinforce his position in high society, a calculated move to ensure his legacy remained untarnished. Mr. Thompson. His assistant, Sarah Chen, appeared at the study's entrance. "The event coordinator needs your approval for the final arrangements." Alexander nodded, grateful for the interruption of his thoughts. "Of course. Lead the way." As they walked through the mansion, Alexander's mind wandered to the empire he'd built. Thompson Industries had grown from a modest tech startup to a multinational corporation under his leadership. Each success, each acquisition, each merger had been meticulously planned and executed. Yet beneath the veneer of achievement lay a foundation of compromises and decisions that haunted his sleepless nights. The ballroom was a symphony of activity. Crystal glasses clinked as they were arranged in perfect pyramids, while florists created elaborate centerpieces that seemed to defy gravity. Alexander approved each detail mechanically, his thoughts elsewhere. "The guest list has been finalized," Sarah informed him, scrolling through her tablet. "Over 300 confirmed. Attendees including the mayor, several tech industry leaders, and prominent investors." "Excellent," Alexander replied, though his voice lacked enthusiasm. "Ensure the security team is briefed properly. I want no unexpected surprises tonight." As the afternoon sun cast long shadows through the windows, Alexander retreated to his private quarters to prepare for the evening. His tuxedo, custom-tailored in London, waited on a mannequin like a soldier standing at attention. As he dressed, his hands moved automatically, muscle memory from countless similar events guiding his fingers as they fastened buttons and adjusted cuffs. The first guests began arriving precisely at 8 o'clock. Alexander played his role perfectly. The successful businessman, the gracious host, the pillar of society. He shook hands, laughed at the right moments, and discussed business prospects with practiced ease. Yet beneath his polished exterior, an inexplicable anxiety gnawed at him. By 9, the gala was in full swing. The air hummed with conversation and the subtle notes of a string quartet. Crystal glasses clinked in toasts to success and future ventures. Alexander stood at the center of it all, like a spider in an elaborate web of social connections and business relationships. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began his prepared speech, his voice carrying across the hushed ballroom. "I'm honored to welcome you to this celebration of 2 decades of innovation and growth at Thompson Industries." The words flowed smoothly, rehearsed to perfection. He spoke of achievements, of breaking new ground in technology, of corporate responsibility and future aspirations. The audience hung on every word exactly as planned. Then it happened. A commotion near the ballroom's entrance drew attention. A young man, perhaps in his mid-20s, pushed past the security guards. He was well-dressed but clearly uninvited, his presence sending ripples of whispers through the crowd. Alexander's words faltered as the young man approached. There was something familiar about his features, something that made the old photograph in his desk drawer flash through Alexander's mind. The young man stopped in the center of the ballroom, his eyes locked on Alexander. The string quartet fell, silent, 300 pairs of eyes watched in anticipation. "Papai!" The young man's voice rang out, clear and strong, echoing off the ornate ceiling. The Portuguese word for father hung in the air like a thunderclap. Alexander's glass slipped from his fingers, shattering on the marble floor. The sound seemed to break something in the atmosphere, releasing a flood of gasps and whispers among the guests. Time seemed to freeze in the opulent ballroom. The young man's proclamation hung in the air, heavy with 2 decades of unspoken history. Security guards moved to intercept him, but Alexander raised a hand, stopping them in their tracks. His eyes remained fixed on the stranger's face, searching for traces of the child he'd left behind so many years ago. "I think there's been a misunderstanding," Alexander managed to say, his voice steady despite the tremor in his hands. "This is a private event." The young man reached into his jacket, producing an envelope that looked weathered with age. "No misunderstanding, Mr. Thompson. Or should I say, father?" His accent was slight but noticeable, a hint of Brazilian Portuguese coloring his words. "I have proof of who I am." Sarah Chen appeared at Alexander's side, ready to intervene, but curiosity and something deeper, guilt perhaps, made him wave her away. The guests had formed a loose circle around them, their faces a mixture of shock and fascination. This was precisely the kind of scandal Alexander had spent years trying to avoid. "These documents," the young man continued, opening the envelope with careful precision, "include a letter from my mother, Maria Santos, written before her passing. And this..." He pulled out a small golden pendant on a broken chain. "This is what I was wearing the day you left me on that road in Brazil." Alexander's composure cracked slightly at the sight of the pendant. He remembered it clearly, a family heirloom his late wife had insisted the boy wear for protection. The memory hit him like a physical blow, momentarily stealing his breath. "Perhaps we should continue this discussion in private," Alexander suggested, acutely aware of the hundreds of eyes watching their every move. The whispers had already begun, phones discreetly recording the scene that would undoubtedly make headlines by morning. The young man, Gabriel, according to the documents he held, smiled slightly. "Why? Ashamed of your past, of what you did?" His voice carried across the ballroom, each word a carefully aimed arrow. "I've spent 20 years wondering why a father would abandon his child. 20 years imagining this moment." In the tense silence that followed, a glass shattered somewhere in the crowd, making several guests jump. Alexander's mind raced through possibilities, calculations, damage control scenarios. But beneath the strategic thinking, a deeper turmoil brewed, the weight of his past choices pressing down on him with renewed force. "Ladies and gentlemen," Sarah's voice cut through the tension, professional and calm, "we'll be taking a brief intermission. Please enjoy the refreshments in the garden terrace." The crowd reluctantly began to move, though their attention remained fixed on the unfolding drama. Alexander gestured toward his study, and Gabriel followed, still clutching the envelope and pendant. As they walked through the mansion's corridors, Alexander noticed details he hadn't initially registered. The young man's confident stride, the subtle resemblance to Maria in his features, the way he carried himself with a dignity that seemed both natural and practiced. The study door closed behind them with a heavy click, muffling the distant murmur of the gala. Alexander moved to his desk, his sanctuary in times of crisis, while Gabriel remained standing, his posture tense but controlled. "Those documents," Alexander said, extending his hand. "May I?" Gabriel handed them over, watching intently as Alexander examined each page. The letter was indeed in Maria's handwriting. He would never forget those distinctive curves and flourishes. The pendant was exactly as he remembered, down to the small scratch on its surface from when the boy had fallen while playing. "Why now?" Alexander asked, looking up from the documents. "After 20 years?" "Because I needed you to feel secure," Gabriel replied, his voice taking on a harder edge. "Comfortable, successful. I needed you to have everything to lose." He moved closer to the desk, his eyes never leaving Alexander's face. "And now you do." A subtle shift occurred in the room's atmosphere. Alexander sensed something beneath Gabriel's words, a purpose beyond mere reconciliation or confrontation. The young man reached into his pocket again, producing a USB drive. This contains evidence of certain irregularities in Thompson Industries' operations over the past 2 decades. Fascinating reading, really. Would your shareholders find it equally interesting, I wonder? The implied threat hung in the air between them. Alexander's hand moved instinctively toward his desk drawer, where the old photograph lay hidden. Something about this situation felt wrong, orchestrated. Yet the evidence seemed irrefutable. The pendant, Maria's letter, the young man's features that could have been his own at that age. Miles away from the Thompson mansion's opulence, in a modest auto repair shop on the outskirts of Sacramento, Marcus Wilson's hands moved with practiced precision over an engine. Though he couldn't hear the mechanical symphony around him, his fingers could feel every vibration, every irregular pulse that indicated a problem needing attention. At 25, he had built a reputation as one of the most talented mechanics in the area, his disability becoming his greatest strength in understanding machines through touch and intuition. The afternoon sun filtered through the workshop's dusty windows, casting long shadows across the concrete floor. Marcus wiped his hands on a rag and stepped back to admire his work. The vintage Mustang he'd been restoring was nearly complete, its chrome surfaces gleaming under the fluorescent lights. His colleague, Tom, approached with a tablet in hand, using exaggerated gestures to get his attention. "News alert," Tom signed, his movements quick but precise. He held up the tablet, showing a breaking news article about the Thompson Industries gala. Marcus's hands froze mid-motion as he read the headline, "Mystery Son Crashes Thompson Industries Anniversary Gala." The accompanying photo showed a well-dressed young man confronting Alexander Thompson. Marcus's heart began to race as he studied the image. The resemblance between the stranger and Thompson was undeniable, but something about the scene made his stomach churn. He touched the small scar behind his right ear, a permanent reminder of that distant night on a Brazilian highway. Mrs. Rosa, his adoptive mother, had told him the story countless times, how she'd found him wandering along the roadside, confused and frightened, how she'd searched for his family for months before finally taking him in, teaching him sign language, and giving him a new life. She'd never hidden the truth about his past, but she'd also never been able to explain why he'd been abandoned. Marcus grabbed his jacket and signed to Tom that he was taking his lunch break. Instead of heading to the usual diner, he drove to the small house he shared with Mrs. Rosa. The elderly woman was tending to her beloved garden when he arrived, her face lighting up at the sight of him. "What brings you home so early?" she signed, noticing his troubled expression. Marcus showed her the news article on his phone. Mrs. Rosa's weathered hands trembled slightly as she read, her eyes filling with tears. She disappeared into the house, returning moments later with a small wooden box Marcus had never seen before. "I've been waiting for the right time," she signed, her movements slow and deliberate. "I think that time is now." Inside the box lay a collection of carefully preserved items, newspaper clippings about Alexander Thompson's rise to power, a faded photograph of a woman holding a small boy, and most surprisingly, a sealed envelope addressed to "My son" in elegant handwriting. Mrs. Rosa's hands moved again, explaining how she'd discovered these items in his pocket that night, but had kept them hidden, fearing they would only bring him pain. The woman in the photograph, she explained, was his mother, Maria Santos. With trembling fingers, Marcus opened the envelope. The letter inside was written in Portuguese, but Mrs. Rosa had arranged for an English translation, attached with a paperclip. As he read his mother's words, the world around him seemed to fade away. The letter revealed a complex web of corporate espionage, betrayal, and a desperate mother's attempt to protect her child. Maria had discovered something damaging about Thompson Industries, something that had led to threats against her family. The letter was dated just days before her mysterious passing. Marcus looked up from the letter to find Mrs. Rosa watching him intently. "There's more," she signed, reaching into the box one last time. She withdrew a small USB drive, its surface scratched with age. "Your mother hid this in your shoe. I never knew what was on it, but I kept it safe, hoping someday it might help you understand." The revelation hit Marcus like a physical blow. While he'd been building his life here, Learning to thrive despite his challenges, someone else was now claiming his identity, his history, his truth. The imposter at the gala couldn't possibly know about this drive or the real story behind his abandonment. Mrs. Rosa touched his arm gently, drawing his attention back to her. "What will you do?" she signed. Marcus stood, his decision already made. He had built a life here, found purpose in his work, created a family with Mrs. Rosa. But the truth of his past was calling, demanding to be heard. The imposter's appearance at the gala wasn't just an attack on Alexander Thompson. It was a theft of Marcus's own history, his identity, his right to choose how and when to confront his past. In a luxurious penthouse overlooking San Francisco Bay, Victor Delgado watched the news coverage of the Thompson Gala with satisfaction. At 65, his once dark hair had turned silver, but his eyes retained the sharp calculation that had made him a formidable businessman decades ago. Raised a glass of aged scotch toward the television screen, where Gabriel's confrontation with Alexander Thompson played on repeat. "Perfect timing, perfect execution," he murmured, turning to face the young man who stood nervously by the floor-to-ceiling windows. "You've exceeded my expectations, Gabriel." Gabriel shifted uncomfortably, loosening his tie. He bought it completely. The pendant and Maria's letter were exactly what you said they'd be. His weak points. He paused, running a hand through his hair. "But there's something else, something I didn't expect." The way he looked at me, it was like he wanted to believe I was his son. Victor's expression hardened. "Don't let sentiment cloud your judgment. Remember our agreement. You play your part, and you get what you've always wanted. A share of Thompson Industries, and a new identity far from your past in the foster system." The young man nodded, though doubt flickered across his features. He pulled out his phone, showing Victor a series of text messages. "Thompson wants to meet tomorrow. Private lunch at his estate. He's already talking about a DNA test to formalize everything." "Excellent." Victor moved to his desk, removing a thick file from a hidden safe. "Everything you need to know is in here. Details about Maria Santos, the night of the abandonment, even small personal details that only his real son would know. Memorize it all. The DNA test won't be a problem. I have connections at the laboratory." Gabriel took the file, his hands trembling slightly. "What about the USB drive? The one I threatened him with? He'll want to see what's on it eventually." Victor's smile was cold. "Let me worry about that. For now, focus on becoming the loving, long-lost son. Make him trust you completely. The rest will fall into place." As Gabriel left the penthouse, Victor turned back to the Bayview, his mind traveling back 20 years. He saw himself standing in Alexander Thompson's office, presenting evidence of corporate fraud that could have brought down their joint empire. Instead of acting on it, Thompson had orchestrated Victor's downfall, using manufactured evidence to destroy his reputation and seize control of their company. The door opened quietly, and a woman entered, Helena Martinez, Victor's most trusted associate. "The news has gone viral," she reported. "Social media is buzzing with theories about Thompson's secret son. Our team is amplifying the most damaging speculations." "And our other project?" Victor asked, not turning around. "The real son remains unaware of our surveillance. He's still working at that auto repair shop in Sacramento, living a quiet life with his adoptive mother." Victor nodded slowly. "Keep watching him. If he makes any moves to contact Thompson or investigate his past, I want to know immediately." Helena hesitated before speaking again. "There's something else. Our sources inside Thompson Industries report unusual activity in their cybersecurity division. They're strengthening their firewalls, conducting internal audits. It's as if Thompson is preparing for something." "He's scared," Victor replied, satisfaction evident in his voice. "For 20 years, he's lived with the fear that his past would catch up to him. Now it has, but not in the way he expects." He turned to face Helena, his expression serious. "Increase the pressure. I want every aspect of his life under scrutiny. His business partners, his social connections, even his household staff. Find their weak points." As Helena left to carry out his instructions, Victor returned to his desk and opened a worn leather journal. Its pages contained 2 decades of careful planning, each step meticulously crafted to bring Alexander Thompson to his knees. But as he reviewed his notes, a new concern nagged at him. The real son, the one he'd been watching from afar, was a wild card. Victor had assumed the young man's disability and simple life would keep him far from this elaborate game of revenge. But something about the timing of Gabriel's appearance, combined with Thompson's unexpected reaction, made him uneasy. He picked up his phone, dialing a number he rarely used. "Double the surveillance on Marcus Wilson," he instructed. "I want to know everything. His movements, his contacts, any changes in his routine. If he so much as looks in Thompson's direction, I need to know." The morning light filtered through the stained glass windows of Alexander Thompson's private dining room, casting colorful patterns across the antique mahogany table. Gabriel sat across from him, his posture perfect, his movements calculated, as he delicately cut into his omelette. The breakfast meeting had been Alexander's idea, a chance to speak privately, away from the public eye and the corporate machine that demanded his attention. "Tell me about your life," Alexander said, studying the young man's face. After that night." Gabriel set down his fork, his expression carefully composed. "A farming family found me," he began, his voice soft but clear. "They took me in, raised me as their own. We didn't have much, but they gave me love, education." He paused, taking a sip of orange juice. "When I was 18, I started searching for answers. It took years to piece everything together." Alexander nodded, his hands clasped tightly around his coffee cup. "And Maria? When did she—" "10 years ago," Gabriel replied, emotion flickering across his features. "She never stopped hoping I'd find my way back to you. The letter she left, she wanted me to understand why everything happened the way it did." Sarah Chen appeared at the doorway, tablet in hand. "Mr. Thompson, the DNA testing facility called. They can accommodate us this afternoon." "Thank you, Sarah." Alexander turned, back to Gabriel. "I hope you understand why this is necessary, for legal purposes, for the company." "Of course," Gabriel smiled, though something cold flickered in his eyes. "I have nothing to hide." As Sarah left, Alexander reached into his jacket pocket and withdrew an old photograph, the same one he'd kept hidden in his desk drawer for 20 years. "This was taken the day before—" He trailed off, unable to finish the sentence. "Do you remember it?" Gabriel took the photograph, his fingers trembling slightly. "The park in Sao Paulo," he said softly. "Near the botanical gardens. You were teaching me to fly a kite." Alexander's breath caught in his throat. He hadn't mentioned the location to anyone, not even Sarah. The memory of that day was vivid, the bright Brazilian sun, the laughter of his son as the kite soared higher, Maria watching them from a nearby bench. It was their last, happy moment. Together. "There's something else," Alexander said, reaching for his briefcase. "The USB drive you mentioned at the gala. What exactly does it contain?" Gabriel's expression shifted almost imperceptibly. "Evidence of certain decisions made 20 years ago. Corporate transactions that wouldn't withstand scrutiny, but more importantly, proof of why you were forced to abandon me." Alexander's hands stilled on the briefcase. "Forced? The threats against Mother weren't random, were they?" Gabriel leaned forward, his voice dropping to a whisper. "Someone wanted to destroy you, to take everything you'd built, and they used us to do it." The words hit Alexander like a physical blow. He stood abruptly, walking to the window. The manicured grounds of his estate stretched out before him, a testament to everything he'd achieved, and everything he'd sacrificed to keep it. "I need to see what's on that drive," he said finally, his voice hoarse. "All in good time," Gabriel replied. "First, there's something you should know about Victor Delgado." Alexander turned sharply at the name. "What about him? He's been watching you all these years, planning, waiting. Did you really think he'd simply accept what you did to him?" Before Alexander could respond, Sarah reappeared. "Sir, there's a situation at the office that requires your immediate attention. The board is requesting an emergency meeting regarding this morning's stock fluctuations." Alexander glanced at Gabriel, who smiled reassuringly. "Go," the young man said. have time to finish this conversation. I'm not going anywhere, Father. As Alexander left the room, Gabriel's smile faded. He pulled out his phone, typing a quick message. He's asking about the drive, moving to phase 2. The response came almost immediately. Good. Don't deviate. From the plan. Gabriel stared at the photograph still lying on the table, the happy family he was pretending to be part of. For a moment, doubt crept into his mind. The genuine pain in Alexander's eyes, the weight of 20 years of guilt. It wasn't what he'd expected. The man Victor had described was a heartless monster, but the reality was more complex. Standing at the window, Gabriel watched Alexander's car pull away from the mansion. The pieces were all in place, the trap ready to spring. Yet something held him back. A growing sense that he was missing a crucial piece of the puzzle. Victor's plans were elegant, calculated, but there was a question Gabriel couldn't shake. If the real son was supposed to be deaf and mute, why had no one mentioned it in any of the documents? The laptop screen cast a blue glow across Marcus's face as he sat in his small home office. The USB drive from his mother finally connected after all these years. Mrs. Rosa had gone to bed hours ago, but sleep was the furthest thing from his mind. His fingers flew across the keyboard, decrypting files that had waited 2 decades to be discovered. What he found made his blood run cold. Financial records, emails, surveillance photos, a digital trail documenting the systematic destruction of Victor Delgado's business empire. But more importantly, there were documents proving that Thompson Industries had been built on a foundation of corporate espionage and strategic sabotage. Among the files was a video that made Marcus pause. He clicked play, and his mother's face appeared on screen. She looked nervous, constantly glancing over her shoulder as she recorded the message. Though he couldn't hear her words, years of reading lips allowed him to understand most of what she was saying. "My dear son," she began, "if you're watching this, then my worst fears have come true. Alexander isn't the man I thought I married. The company's success, it's built on ruins. Victor Delgado wasn't the only victim. There were others, so many others." Marcus leaned closer to the screen, his heart pounding as he read her next words. "But there's something else, something even Alexander doesn't know. The night of the accident. It wasn't an accident at all. I found proof." The video cut off abruptly. Marcus sat back, his mind racing. He opened another file, this one a series of photographs showing Victor Delgado meeting with various people over the years. The most recent photos were dated just weeks ago, showing Delgado with a young man who looked remarkably like Marcus himself. Tom's earlier message about the gala suddenly took on new meaning. Marcus pulled up the news coverage again, studying the face of the man claiming to be Thompson's son. The resemblance was uncanny. They could have been twins. But why? What was Delgado's game? A notification popped up on his screen, an email from an anonymous sender. The subject line made his heart skip. "Your mother knew the truth." Inside was a single line. "Meet me at the Golden Gate Overlook tomorrow, 10 a.m. Come alone." Marcus stared at the message, weighing his options. It could be a trap, but it could also be his chance to understand the full story. He looked at the photo of his mother again, remembering the determination in her eyes as she recorded her warning. A movement outside his window caught his attention. Through the curtains, he noticed a car parked across the street. The same, one he'd spotted earlier that day at the garage. Someone was watching him. Making a decision, Marcus began to type. He created a detailed document, combining everything he'd discovered with his mother's letter and video. As he worked through the night, a plan began to form in his mind. The imposter at the gala hadn't just stolen his identity, he was part of something bigger, something that threatened to destroy more lives than just Alexander Thompson's. Mrs. Rosa found him still awake at dawn, surrounded by printouts and notes. She took one look at his face and knew something had changed. "I need to go to San Francisco," he signed. "But first, I need your help." Together, they began preparing. Mrs. Rosa brought out a box of old newspapers she'd collected over the years, every article about Thompson Industries, every mention of Alexander Thompson or Victor Delgado. As they spread the clippings across, The flaw patterns emerged that even 20 years of investigative journalists had missed. Marcus pointed to a photograph from 15 years ago, a charity gala where Alexander Thompson stood with other business leaders. In the background, barely visible, was Victor Delgado, his expression dark with barely concealed hatred. "He's been planning this for years," Marcus signed to Mrs. Rosa. "And that man at the gala, the imposter, he's just a pawn." Mrs. Rosa touched his arm, her expression concerned. "What will you do?" she signed. Marcus's response was firm. "I'm going. To expose the truth. All of it. But not for revenge, for justice. For everyone who was hurt by their games." He turned back to his laptop, pulling up information about Thompson Industries' upcoming shareholders' meeting. In 3 days, Alexander Thompson would announce a major corporate restructuring. The perfect moment for Delgado to spring whatever trap he'd been setting for 2 decades. But first, Marcus had a mystery to solve. He opened the email again, studying the meeting request. The Overlook location wasn't random. It was where his mother had last been seen alive. Someone was trying to tell him something that had been buried for 20 years. The morning fog rolled thick across the Golden Gate Bridge, shrouding the Overlook in a ghostly veil. Marcus arrived early, parking his motorcycle where he could observe approaching vehicles. He'd chosen the bike for its maneuverability. If this was a trap, he wanted a quick escape route. The view before him was both beautiful and haunting. Somewhere on this winding road, his mother had last been seen alive. The official report claimed she'd lost control of her car, but his mother's video suggested a darker truth. Marcus touched the small camera he'd concealed in his jacket. Every moment of this meeting would be recorded. A sleek black Mercedes pulled into the parking area precisely at 10 a.m. Marcus's hands tightened on the railing as a woman emerged, elderly but elegant, her silver hair swept back in a sophisticated chignon. He recognized her immediately from the old photographs. Helena Martinez, Victor Delgado's right hand for over 30 years. She approached slowly, her heels clicking against the pavement. When she reached him, she produced a tablet and began typing. The message that appeared was, "Unexpected. I knew your mother. She trusted me with information that got her silenced." Marcus studied her face before responding in written text. "Why come forward now?" Helena's fingers moved across the tablet again. "Because Victor has gone too far. This isn't about justice anymore. It's about destruction. Your mother wouldn't have wanted this." A tour bus pulled into the Overlook, disgorging a group of chattering tourists. Helena glanced at them nervously before continuing to type, "Victor doesn't know I'm here. He thinks I'm still loyal, but your mother made me promise to protect you if things went wrong." Marcus's heart raced as he read her next message. "The night she disappeared, Maria left something for you. Something neither Victor nor Alexander knows about. A safety deposit box at the First National Bank downtown." The fog began to lift slightly, revealing the bridge's majestic towers. Helena reached into her purse and withdrew a small envelope. Inside was a key and a sequence of numbers, the box's location and access code. "Be careful," she typed. "Victor has eyes everywhere. The young man pretending to be you, Gabriel Martinez, he's my grandson. Victor has been grooming him for this role since he was a child, using him as a weapon for revenge. But Gabriel doesn't know the whole truth." A black SUV appeared at the entrance to the Overlook, moving slowly. Helena's expression changed to one of alarm. "We're being watched," she typed quickly. "Take this burner phone. I'll contact you when it's safe. Don't trust anyone, not even Alexander. The truth about your mother's passing is worse than you imagine." She turned to leave, then paused to type one final message. "Your mother had proof that could have brought down both Victor and Alexander. That's why she had to be silenced. But she was smarter than they knew. She left a trail for you to follow." As Helena walked back to her car, Marcus noticed 2 men in dark suits emerging from the SUV. They were trying to look casual, but their earpieces and rigid posture betrayed their purpose. He waited until Helena's Mercedes disappeared around the bend before making his move. Starting his motorcycle, Marcus took off in the opposite direction, weaving through traffic with practiced ease. In his mirror, he saw the SUV attempting to follow, but the morning commute traffic worked in his favor. By the time he reached the city proper, he'd lost his tail. Finding a quiet spot in a parking garage, Marcus examined the key more closely. Embedded in its handle was a tiny microchip, the kind used in high-security systems 20 years ago. His mother hadn't just left evidence, she'd left a digital breadcrumb trail that only he, with his expertise in mechanics and technology, could follow. The burner phone buzzed with a text. The safety deposit box is a decoy. Victor's men will be watching the bank. The real evidence is somewhere only a son would look. Think about your last happy memory with her. Marcus closed his eyes, letting his mind drift back. The park in São Paulo, the botanical gardens, the kite flying high against the blue sky. But there was something else, a tiny detail that had always puzzled him. That morning, his mother had taken him to her favorite restaurant, insisting on having their picture taken in front of an old jukebox. The memory clicked into place. The jukebox now sat in Thompson's mansion, part of his extensive collection of restored antiques. His mother's final message wasn't in a bank vault. It was hidden inside a piece of his father's prized collection, waiting 2 decades to be found. The DNA test results lay unopened on Alexander Thompson's desk, casting a long shadow across the polished surface. Gabriel sat in one of the leather chairs, watching his supposed father pace the study. The morning light caught the silver in Alexander's hair, highlighting how much the past few days had aged him. "Aren't you going to open it?" Gabriel asked, fighting to keep his voice steady. Victor had assured him the test results would be handled, but doubt gnawed at his conscience. The more time he spent with Alexander, the harder it became to maintain the deception. Alexander picked up the envelope, but didn't open it. "Tell me about the kite," he said instead, his voice soft. "That day in the park, what color was it?" Gabriel's prepared response caught in his throat. This wasn't in Victor's file, wasn't part of the script he'd memorized. It was so long ago," he hedged. "The kite was yellow," Alexander continued, watching Gabriel's face carefully. "With red stripes. You insisted on that combination because they were your mother's favorite colors. You were wearing a blue sweater that day, even though it was too warm for it. Maria couldn't convince you to take it off." Sweat beaded on Gabriel's forehead. These details weren't in any photograph, weren't part of the dossier Victor had given. Him? He reached for his water glass, buying time to think. "Mr. Thompson," Sarah Chen interrupted from the doorway. "The board members are assembled in the conference room. They're requesting an update on the family situation." Alexander nodded, setting down the unopened envelope. "We'll continue this later," he told Gabriel. "Make yourself comfortable. My home is your home, after all." Once alone, Gabriel moved quickly to Alexander's desk, reaching for the DNA results. His hands trembled as he opened the envelope, scanning the contents. His heart nearly stopped. These weren't the fake results Victor had promised. These were real, and they confirmed what he'd begun to suspect. He was not Alexander Thompson's son. Gabriel pulled out his phone to call Victor, but hesitated. The past few days had shown him a different side of Alexander Thompson, not the heartless monster Victor had described, but a man haunted by his past choices. The weight of his deception suddenly felt unbearable. Moving to the window, Gabriel noticed a motorcycle pulling up to the service entrance of the mansion. The rider's movements caught his attention. There was something familiar about them, something that reminded him of the surveillance photos Victor had shown him of the real son. His phone buzzed with a text from Victor. "Phase 3 begins tomorrow, be ready." Attached was a video file showing Alexander Thompson in a heated argument with Victor 20 years ago. The audio was clear. "Your son for your silence. That's the deal, Alexander, or everything burns." Gabriel sank into the leather chair, his world tilting on its axis. He'd agreed to this plan believing he was helping to expose a corrupt businessman, but the truth was far more complex. Victor hadn't just given him a role to play, he'd made Gabriel complicit in a decades-old vendetta. The sound of footsteps in the hallway made him look up. Through the study's doorway, he caught a glimpse of the motorcycle rider being escorted to the service elevator by one of the staff. The man moved with a deliberate grace, his awareness of his surroundings evident in every step. Gabriel's phone buzzed again, this time with a message from an unknown number. The woman you pretend to call mother left a message for her real son. Find it before Victor does, or more lives will be destroyed. Looking around the study, Gabriel's eyes fell on an old jukebox in the corner, a restored antique that seemed out of place among the modern decor. Alexander had mentioned it was from Brazil, a piece of his past he couldn't bear to part with. A memory surfaced, Victor's obsession with that particular piece, his insistence that Gabriel learn its history, its significance. But why would a man bent on revenge care about an old jukebox? The answer hit him with stunning clarity. He wasn't just playing the role of a lost son, he was a pawn in a game that had started long before he was born. And somewhere in this mansion, hidden in plain sight, was the truth that both Victor and Alexander would do anything to keep buried. The service corridors of the Thompson mansion buzzed with quiet activity as Marcus made his way through them, his years of mechanical expertise helping him blend in with the maintenance staff. His heart pounded against his ribs, but his hands remained steady. The staff badge Helena had provided gave him access to the less visible arteries of the house, where the real work of maintaining such a massive estate took place. His target was clear, the vintage jukebox from his childhood memories. According to the mansion's layout Helena had shared, it was located in Alexander Thompson's private study. But getting there undetected would require perfect timing and a bit of luck. Meanwhile, in the main conference room, Alexander Thompson faced his board of directors, their faces a mixture of concern and barely concealed judgment. The DNA test. Results sat unopened in his breast pocket, weighing like lead. The market is responding poorly to these family revelations, board member Jenkins stated, his tone carefully neutral. Our shareholders are concerned about succession plans and potential instability in leadership. Alexander's response was interrupted by a subtle vibration from his phone. A text message appeared. Check the jukebox. M. The initial made his blood run cold. Only Maria had ever signed her messages that way. In the study, Gabriel paced nervously, his phone clutched in his hand. Victor's latest message was clear. Initiate final phase at the shareholders' meeting tomorrow, no more delays. But doubt had taken root in his mind, growing stronger with each passing hour. His grandmother's warning echoed in his thoughts. The truth about Maria Santos is not what you think. Helena had raised him after his parents' passing, kept him safe while Victor molded him into the perfect instrument of revenge. But now he wondered if she'd also been trying to protect him from something darker. The study door opened, and Sarah Chen entered, her usual professional demeanor slightly ruffled. Mr. Martinez, she said, using the name Gabriel had given her, there's a situation requiring your attention in the main hall. As Gabriel followed her out, neither noticed the shadow that slipped into the study through the service entrance. Marcus moved silently to the jukebox, his fingers running over its familiar surface. The memory of that last morning with his mother grew sharper, her insistence on taking a photo, the way she'd shown him how to press the buttons in a specific sequence. With trembling hands, Marcus input the combination he'd memorized from the old photograph: B7, A4, C3, D6. The machine hummed to life, but instead of music, a hidden panel clicked open in its base. Inside was a small package wrapped in oilcloth, preserved perfectly for 2 decades. Marcus carefully unwrapped it, revealing a leather-bound journal and a set of microfilm slides. As he began to read, his mother's handwriting filled in the gaps of a story far more complex than he'd imagined. Maria Santos hadn't just discovered corporate fraud. She'd uncovered a conspiracy involving both Alexander Thompson and Victor Delgado. The 2 men had been partners in a scheme that went beyond business, touching powerful political figures and international criminal organizations. But when Maria threatened to expose everything, they'd turned on each other, each trying to protect their own interests. The sound of approaching footsteps made Marcus freeze. Through the study's doorway, he could see Gabriel returning, his face troubled. Their eyes met across the room, recognition flickering between them like an electric current. For a moment, neither moved. They were mirror images of each other, one raised in silence and shadow, the other groomed for a role he never chose. The weight of 20 years of secrets hung in the air between them. Then Gabriel did something unexpected. He closed the study door and turned the lock. "You're him," he said simply. "The real son." Marcus nodded, pulling out his phone to type. "And you're Victor's pawn." "Not anymore." Gabriel's voice was firm. "My grandmother, Helena, she told me to find you. There's something you need to know about tomorrow's shareholders meeting. Victor's planning something big, something that goes beyond just revenge." Before Marcus could respond, an alert flashed on both their phones. Breaking news. The screen showed Alexander Thompson's face, accompanied by a headline that made their blood run cold. Thompson Industries CEO reveals shocking truth about past. Corporate practices, emergency board meeting called. In the conference room, Alexander stood before his board. The DNA test results finally opened on the table before him. 20 years ago, he began, his voice steady despite the tremor in his hands. "I made choices that set in motion events I can no longer control. It's time for the truth to come out." But the truth he was about to reveal was only part of the story. In his study, his real son held evidence that would shake the foundations of not just Thompson Industries, but an entire network of power and corruption that had operated in the shadows for decades. Victor Delgado watched the breaking news about Thompson's announcement from his penthouse office, his expression unreadable. On his desk lay photographs spanning 2 decades, surveillance shots of Marcus growing up, Helena with young Gabriel, Alexander at various corporate events, 20 years of planning, of waiting, all leading to this moment. His phone buzzed with an urgent message from Helena. Gabriel's not responding. "Something's wrong." Victor's fingers tightened around the device. He'd noticed subtle changes in his grandson's behavior lately, hesitation where there should be determination. In Thompson's study, Marcus and Gabriel worked quickly to document the contents of Maria's journal. Each page revealed another layer of a conspiracy that went far beyond corporate rivalry. Names of politicians, judges, business leaders, all connected through a web of corrupt dealings and mutual blackmail. "My grandmother," Gabriel said, watching Marcus photograph the pages, "she's been protecting this information all along, hasn't she? That's why she raised me, kept me close to Victor." Marcus typed his response. "Your grandmother was my mother's closest friend. She's been playing a long game, waiting for the right moment." The journal's final pages contained detailed accounts of offshore accounts, shell companies, and a complex money laundering operation that implicated dozens of prominent figures. But it was the last entry that made both young men pause. A letter, addressed to Alexander Thompson, dated the day before Maria's car went off the road. "My dearest Alexander," it began, "by the time you read this, I'll have taken steps to protect our son. What I've discovered goes beyond you and Victor. There are people involved who would stop at nothing to keep their secrets buried. The evidence is hidden where only our son could find it. He has your talent for machines and my passion for truth. When he's ready, he'll understand." The study door suddenly rattled, followed by Alexander's voice. "Gabriel, are you in there?" The 2 young men exchanged glances. Gabriel moved to the door while Marcus quickly gathered the evidence, slipping it into his messenger bag. Through the study's window, he could see multiple black SUVs pulling up to the mansion's entrance. "Just a moment," Gabriel called out, then turned to Marcus. "The service elevator, it leads to the garage level. Here." He quickly wrote down a code on a piece of paper. "This will get you past security. My grandmother has a safe house prepared." Marcus hesitated, then typed, "Come with me. Help us expose the truth." The door handle turned again, more insistently this time. Gabriel's expression showed his internal struggle, years of conditioning warring with newfound clarity. "I'll create a diversion," he decided. "But first you need to know tomorrow's shareholders meeting isn't just about Thompson Industries. Victor's planned something bigger. He's going to use the company's global communications network to release sensitive information about everyone involved in the conspiracy." Marcus's eyes widened as he understood the implications. Thousands of innocent employees would lose their jobs, and the economic ripple effects would devastate communities worldwide. The sound of security guards' voices joined Alexander's at the door. Gabriel quickly moved the jukebox back into position and straightened his tie. "Go," he mouthed to Marcus, who slipped through the service entrance just as Gabriel opened the main door. "Sorry for the delay," Gabriel said smoothly to Alexander and the security team. "I was just admiring this vintage jukebox. Remarkable. Peace." Alexander's eyes swept the room, noting the subtle signs of disturbance. Indeed, it holds quite a few secrets. His gaze lingered on the service entrance. "Speaking of secrets, the board is waiting for us. It's time to finish this." As they walked to the conference room, Gabriel's phone buzzed with messages from Victor, demanding updates. But another message appeared from an unknown number. "Safe house compromised. Victor knows. Meet at the original site. H." In the garage, Marcus started his motorcycle, the evidence secure in his bag. As he rode out into the San Francisco streets, his mind raced with possibilities. His mother's journal hadn't just exposed corruption, it had revealed a truth about power and responsibility that both Victor and Alexander had failed to understand. The sun was setting over the bay, casting long shadows across the city. In less than 24 hours, the shareholders' meeting would begin. Victor's plan would be set in motion, and somewhere in the gathering darkness, Helena Martinez was preparing for a confrontation 20 years in the making. Marcus touched the scar behind his ear, feeling the weight of his mother's final message. The truth wasn't just about justice anymore. It was about choosing what kind of person he wanted to be. Would he let his desire for revenge destroy thousands of innocent lives? Or was there another way to honor his mother's memory? The dawn painted San Francisco's skyline in shades of gold as Helena Martinez made her way through the botanical gardens. This was where it had all started, where Maria had first discovered the evidence that would set these events in motion. Now, 20 years later, it would end here. She sat on the same bench where she and Maria had spent countless afternoons, watching their children play. The memory of those days felt like a dream now, Gabriel and Marcus running through the gardens, unaware of the storm gathering around them. Her grandson had been just a child then, before Victor molded him into an instrument of revenge. Her phone buzzed with a message from Marcus. "En route, ETA 10 minutes. Another message followed quickly. "Gabriel is coming too. He wants to help." Helena's heart tightened. She'd spent 20 years playing a dangerous game, maintaining Victor's trust while secretly preserving Maria's evidence. She'd raised Gabriel, knowing that one day he would have to choose between loyalty to Victor and the truth about his role in this conspiracy. At Thompson Industries headquarters, Alexander faced his reflection in his office window. The city sprawled, below still waking to what would become a historic day. The morning news was already running stories about his shocking announcement to the board, but they had no idea what was really coming. He opened his safe, removing a file that hadn't seen daylight in 2 decades. Inside were documents that could destroy everything, not just his company, but the entire network of power and influence that Victor had threatened to expose. His fingers brushed against a small photograph tucked inside. Maria, with young Marcus, their last happy moment together. The intercom buzzed. "Sir," Sarah Chen's voice was tense, "Victor Delgado is here. He's demanding to see you." Alexander straightened his tie, squaring his shoulders. "Send him in." Victor entered like a storm cloud, his silver hair immaculate despite the early hour. "You're making a mistake, Alexander. Think about what you're risking." "No, Victor. The mistake was made 20 years ago, when we let our ambition override our humanity, when we let an innocent woman take the fall for our crimes." Victor's laugh was cold. "Humanity. You abandoned your own son on a deserted road, and now you want to play the role of the repentant sinner?" "I never wanted any of this." Alexander's voice cracked slightly. "Maria. She was trying to protect everyone, wasn't she? Not just Marcus, but all the innocent people who would be hurt when the truth came out." "Truth?" Victor moved closer, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "The only truth that matters is power. In 1 hour, the shareholders' meeting begins. My team has control of your global communications network. Everything. Every dirty Secret, every corrupt deal, every person involved will be exposed to the world. Thousands of innocent employees will lose their jobs, Alexander argued. The economic impact, collateral damage, Victor cut him off. Just like Maria was collateral damage, just like your son was supposed to be. Meanwhile, in the botanical gardens, Marcus and Gabriel arrived from different directions, converging on Helena's position. The morning joggers and early tourists paid no attention to their quiet meeting. The safety house was compromised, Helena signed to Marcus while speaking aloud for Gabriel's benefit. Victor's men were waiting. He must have figured out what Maria hid in the jukebox. The journal is safe, Gabriel assured her, but there's something else you need to know. The shareholders' meeting. It's not just about exposing the truth. Victor's planning to use the company's network to release sensitive data about everyone involved in the conspiracy. The economic fallout would be catastrophic. Marcus pulled out his phone, typing quickly, "We can't let that happen. My mother's journal. She wasn't just gathering evidence of corruption. She was trying to find a way to expose the truth without destroying innocent lives." Helena nodded, reaching into her bag to withdraw a final piece of evidence, a small USB drive. "Your mother created a failsafe," she explained, "a way to expose the guilty while protecting the innocent. She encoded it into the company's original software architecture, hidden so deep that even Victor's best hackers wouldn't find it." The morning sun climbed higher as they formulated their plan. In less than an hour, the shareholders' meeting would begin. Victor's team would attempt to seize control of the communications network, not knowing that Maria's failsafe was waiting to be activated. Marcus stared at the old bench where his mother had once sat, remembering fragments of that last day. Her gentle hands showing him how to fold a paper airplane, her smile tinged with sadness as she photographed him by the jukebox. She'd known what was coming, had prepared for this moment long before anyone else understood the stakes. His phone lit up with a final message from Mrs. Rosa. "Remember what your mother always said, the truth without compassion is just another form of cruelty." The Thompson Industries Conference Center buzzed with tension as shareholders and board members filed in for the emergency meeting. Security was tight, with guards positioned at every entrance. In the technical control room, Victor's carefully placed team members waited for his signal, their fingers hovering over keyboards. Sarah Chen moved efficiently through the preparations, her tablet displaying a constant stream of updates. But her usual composure slipped when she noticed an anomaly in the building's security logs. Multiple access points had been triggered simultaneously, yet nothing showed on the cameras. In his office, Alexander Thompson prepared to face the crowd. The evidence from Maria's journal lay heavy in his briefcase, along with 2 decades of secrets about to be exposed. His phone displayed a cryptic message: "Trust the system she built." Garcia, Victor Delgado watched from the executive lounge, a glass of scotch untouched before him. His plan was perfect, the culmination of 20 years of patience and calculation, yet something felt wrong. Helena wasn't answering his calls, and Gabriel's last report had been suspiciously vague. Through the service corridors, Marcus moved. Silently, his knowledge of mechanical systems helping him navigate the building's skeleton. Gabriel had provided detailed blueprints, marking the critical access points to the main server room. The USB drive from Helena felt like it was burning a hole in his pocket. In the main lobby, Gabriel adjusted his tie, playing his role one last time. Board members nodded to him, now familiar with the face of Thompson's presumed heir. But his attention was focused on the subtle signals around him, the positioning of Victor's security team, the nervous energy of the technical staff. Helena's voice came through his earpiece. "The failsafe program needs to be uploaded directly to the main server. Marcus is in position. Are you ready?" Gabriel's response was barely a whisper. "Yes. But Grandma, what aren't you telling us about Mum's passing?" There was a long pause before Helena replied, "Some truths can wait. Right now, focus on preventing Victor from destroying thousands of lives." The conference center's main hall was filling up. Quickly, reporters gathered outside, drawn by rumors of Alexander Thompson's shocking announcement. On multiple screens, financial news networks speculated about the company's future. Sarah Chen's voice came over the internal communication system. 5 minutes to commencement. All security teams report status. Marcus reached the server room's outer door, his fingers flying over the keypad with the code Gabriel had provided. Inside, 2 of Victor's tech specialists looked up in surprise. Before they could react, the room's lights flickered, and emergency protocols engaged. Helena's distraction right on schedule. In the confusion, Marcus moved quickly to the main console. The USB drive connected smoothly, its contents beginning to upload. On his phone, lines of code scrolled rapidly. Maria's fail-safe program coming to life after 20 years of dormancy. Gabriel stood at the entrance to the main hall, scanning the crowd. His earpiece crackled with Victor's voice. "Begin the sequence, now." Instead of responding, Gabriel looked up at the private balcony where Victor watched. Their eyes met across the distance. In that moment, Victor understood. His perfect plan had a fatal flaw. Alexander Thompson stepped onto the stage, the spotlight harsh against his aged features. 20 years ago, he began, his voice steady, a series of choices were made that changed many lives forever. Today, we face another choice. In the chai server room, Marcus's phone displayed a completion message. The failsafe was uploaded, but now came the crucial part. Activation required simultaneous authorization from multiple points in the building. Helena had positioned herself at one, Gabriel at another. The third point was in Alexander's office, where Sarah Chen waited for their signal. Victor's voice cut through all their earpieces. "Stop them! Lock down the building!" But it was too late. The screens throughout the conference center flickered, then displayed a familiar face. Maria Santos, 20 years younger, looking directly into the camera. "If you're seeing this," she began, "then the failsafe has been activated. What follows is the truth, not just about Thompson Industries, but about the choice between justice and vengeance, between exposure and accountability." The room fell silent as Maria's message continued, her words reaching across 2 decades to touch the present moment. In her face, everyone could see echoes of both Marcus and Gabriel, the sons shaped by her choices and her sacrifice. Alexander gripped the podium, his knuckles white. Victor stood frozen in the balcony. And throughout the building, Maria's failsafe program began its work, not destroying the system as Victor had planned, but transforming it into something she had envisioned 20 years ago. A mechanism for truth that protected the innocent while holding the guilty accountable. Maria's face filled every screen in the Thompson Industries conference center, her recorded message echoing through the stunned silence. The timestamp showed it had been recorded just days before her final drive along the coastal highway. "The evidence I've gathered," she continued, "shows a pattern of corruption that extends far beyond corporate fraud. But more importantly, it shows how power can blind us to our own humanity. Alexander, Victor, you were once friends, partners in building something meaningful. Your ambition turned you into enemies, and that rivalry almost destroyed an innocent child." In the server room, Marcus watched his mother's message with tears in his eyes. Though he couldn't hear her words, the intensity of her expression spoke volumes. The fail-safe program continued its work, systematically processing and categorizing 2 decades of hidden data. Victor's voice crackled through the security channel. "Lock down the building! Stop that broadcast!" But his own security team stood transfixed by the screens, their loyalty wavering as Maria's message continued. "The fail-safe I've created," Maria explained, "isn't designed for revenge. It's a system of accountability. Every transaction, every decision, every action taken by those in power will be transparent. But it protects the innocent, the employees, their families, the communities that depend on stable businesses." Alexander stepped forward, his hands trembling as he reached toward the nearest screen. "Maria," he whispered, "you knew, all this time you knew this day would come." Gabriel appeared at his side, no longer playing a role but standing as himself. "She wasn't the only one who knew. My grandmother, Helena, she's been protecting her legacy, waiting for the right moment." The elevator doors opened, and Helena Martinez stepped into the conference hall. Victor's face contorted with rage as he recognized the USB drive in her hand, identical to the one Marcus had used upstairs. "The failsafe requires 3 keys," Helena announced, her voice carrying across the hushed room. One from Marcus, Maria's son who inherited her passion for truth. One from Gabriel, my grandson who chose conscience over revenge. And one from me, her friend, who promised to protect both her sons until they were ready. Marcus emerged from the service entrance, joining them on the stage. His presence sent ripples through the crowd. His resemblance to the younger Alexander Thompson was undeniable. Using sign language, which Helena translated, he addressed the room. My mother didn't want destruction. She wanted transformation. This system, he gestured to the screens where data was now flowing, it's not about exposing secrets. It's about creating a new kind of transparency, one that holds power accountable while protecting those who depend on it. Victor's laugh cut through the moment, sharp and bitter. You think transparency will change anything? Power corrupts, and people will always choose their own interests. No, Uncle Victor. Gabriel stepped forward, facing his grandfather for the first time as an equal. People choose what they believe in. You taught me that loyalty matters above all else, but you never understood what my grandmother was really loyal to, the truth, and the hope that it could heal instead of destroy. The screens shifted, showing financial data, corporate records, and evidence of the conspiracy that had entangled both Alexander and Victor. But alongside each revelation was a pathway for resolution, ways to address the corruption while preserving the jobs and stability that thousands depended on. This is what she meant, Alexander said softly, understanding dawning in his eyes. The choice isn't between hiding the truth and exposing it. It's about how we use the truth to build something better. Sarah Chen appeared at the back of the stage, her tablet displaying confirmation that the fail-safe program had fully activated. Sir, she addressed Alexander, the system is live. Every major financial center, regulatory body, and news organization is receiving the data stream. Marcus moved to the podium, his presence commanding attention despite his silence. Through Helena's translation, he shared his mother's final message, not one of vengeance, but of hope. The fail-safe wasn't just exposing past crimes, it was creating a framework for future accountability. In the balcony, Victor's hand moved toward his jacket pocket, where a small device waited, his final contingency plan. But before he could reach it, Gabriel's voice rang out. The building systems are already locked to the fail-safe, grandfather. Any attempt to interfere will only trigger additional safeguards. The morning sun broke through the conference center's windows, casting long shadows across the stage where 3 generations stood together. Alexander facing his past, Marcus claiming his future, and Gabriel choosing his own path forward. The hours following Maria's revelation transformed Thompson Industries Conference Center into the epicenter of a corporate earthquake. News helicopters circled overhead as regulatory officials arrived, their presence a testament to the magnitude of the morning's events. Alexander Thompson stood in his office, watching the controlled chaos below. The fail-safe program had done more than expose corruption. It had provided a blueprint for systematic reform. His phone hadn't stopped buzzing with messages from board members, partners, and journalists, all trying to understand the implications of what had been revealed. The markets are stabilizing, Sarah Chen reported, showing him the latest financial data. Maria's program, but it's not just exposing problems, it's offering solutions. In the technical center, Marcus worked with the company's engineers, his expertise with machines proving invaluable as they integrated Maria's fail-safe into the corporate infrastructure. His hands moved swiftly over keyboards, implementing the safeguards his mother had designed 2 decades ago. Helena watched him with pride, remembering the frightened child she'd helped Mrs. Rosa protect all those years ago. Your mother, she signed during a quiet moment. She knew you would understand the machines just like she knew Gabriel would understand people. That's why she designed the fail-safe to need both of you. Gabriel sat with his grandmother in the executive lounge, the weight of decisions and revelations evident in his posture. All these years, he said softly, you were preparing me for this, weren't you? Not for Victor's revenge, but for this moment. Helena touched his hand gently. Maria was my best friend. When she discovered what Victor and Alexander were involved in, she knew she couldn't just expose it. That would hurt too many innocent people. She needed someone who could help guide the truth to light carefully, protecting those who deserved protection. The door opened, and Alexander entered, his face showing the strain of the morning but also something else. Relief, perhaps, or hope. "The board has officially suspended me," he announced, "pending a full investigation, but they've approved the implementation of Maria's transparency protocols." Victor had been detained by federal authorities, his final attempt to undermine the fail-safe thwarted by the very security systems he'd helped put in place. As he was led away, his eyes met Helena's across the lobby. In that moment, decades of shared history passed between them, the choices that had led them here, the price of loyalty, and the power of truth to heal old wounds. Marcus approached. The group, his tablet displaying a message. "The fail-safe is fully operational. Every transaction, every decision will now be subject to transparent oversight. But the system also includes protections for employees, pension funds, and community investments." Alexander turned to his son, really seeing him for the first time. 20 years of guilt and regret culminated in this moment. His hands moved, uncertainly as he attempted to sign, basic phrases he'd been learning in secret, since the truth about Gabriel had made him question everything. "I'm sorry," he signed slowly, the words inadequate but sincere. "Your mother, she was the best of us. She saw what we could become, both the darkness and the light." Marcus's response was both simple and profound. "She left us a choice. We can use this moment to destroy, or we can use it to rebuild." Through the conference center's windows, the afternoon sun cast long shadows across the city. News tickers displayed headlines about the Thompson Industries revelations, but they told only part of the story. The real transformation was happening in the quiet moments, in Alexander learning to communicate with his son, in Gabriel discovering his true purpose, in Helena seeing her long vigil finally bear fruit. Sarah Chen appeared with an urgent update. "The transparency protocols are being adopted by other major corporations. They're calling it the Santos Standard, a new framework for corporate accountability." As the day drew to a close, Marcus found himself back in the server room, standing before the machines that now housed his mother's legacy. On one screen, her image smiled out at him, a still frame from her final message. He touched the screen, gently, understanding now why she'd spent so much time teaching him about machines, about patterns, about finding truth in the quiet spaces between chaos. Gabriel joined him, the two young men standing shoulder to shoulder. They were no longer adversaries or imposters, but partners in something larger than themselves. Through Helena's translation, they shared a moment of quiet understanding. Both sons of Maria Santos in their own ways, both charged with carrying her vision forward. 3 months after Maria's failsafe transformed Thompson Industries, the company's headquarters hummed with renewed purpose. The Santos Standard, as the media had dubbed it, had sparked a revolution in corporate governance. Marcus's workshop in the basement level had become the heart of this transformation, where he led a team developing new systems for transparency and accountability. The afternoon sun streamed through the renovated workshop windows as Marcus fine-tuned. Another implementation of his mother's protocols. His fingers moved with precision over the machinery, each adjustment bringing her vision closer to reality. A gentle tap on his shoulder made him look up to see Alexander, who had been taking intensive sign language courses. "How's the new system coming along?" Alexander signed, his movements more confident now after months of practice. Their relationship was still healing, built on small moments of shared understanding rather than grand gestures. Marcus responded with a demonstration showing how the latest version of the failsafe could predict and prevent ethical breaches before they occurred. His father's eyes lit up with understanding, not just of the technology, but of the legacy Maria had left them both. In another part of the building, Gabriel sat in what had once been Victor's office, now transformed into the headquarters of the Santos Foundation. The walls, once decorated with symbols of power and success, now displayed photographs of community projects and educational initiatives. He was reviewing applications for the Foundation's first round of grants, when Helena entered. "The board approved your proposal," she announced, pride evident in her voice. "The foundation will oversee the implementation of the Santos Standard across all partner companies." Gabriel smiled, touching a framed photograph on his desk. Himself and Marcus at the foundation's launch, their unlikely brotherhood now a symbol of reconciliation. "Have you heard from him?" he asked quietly. Helena knew he meant Victor, who was now cooperating with authorities in exchange for a lighter sentence. "He's providing valuable information about other corporate networks that need reform. Your grandfather is finally using his knowledge to help rather than hurt." The door opened again and Sarah Chen entered with Mrs. Rosa, who had relocated to San Francisco to be closer to Marcus. The elderly woman had become an unexpected bridge between past and present, her quiet wisdom helping guide the Foundation's mission. "The first class of Santos scholars has been selected," Sarah reported, referring to the program that would train future corporate ethics officers. 25 students, all from backgrounds similar to yours and Marcus's. Mrs. Rosa moved to the window, gazing out at the city skyline. She signed to Helena, who translated for Gabriel. "Maria would be proud, not just of what you've built, but of who you've become." Meanwhile, in the main conference room, Alexander sat with the new board of directors, his role now advisory rather than executive. The company's transformation had been painful but necessary, leading to a stronger, more ethical organization. "The latest reports show increased investor confidence," one board member reported. "The Santos Standard is being adopted faster than we anticipated. Companies see it as a competitive advantage." Alexander nodded, his attention drawn to the prototype of a new device sitting on the conference table. Marcus's latest invention, designed to make corporate communications accessible to employees with various disabilities. It was a small thing, perhaps, but it represented everything they were trying to build, a future where no voice went unheard, no perspective ignored. As the day drew to a close, Marcus and Gabriel met in what had once been Alexander's private study. The old jukebox still stood in the corner, now restored to working condition. Marcus had kept it as a reminder of where everything had started. His mother's foresight, her love, her determination to protect what mattered most. Gabriel inserted a coin, and the machine came to life. Though Marcus couldn't hear the music, he could feel the vibrations through his fingertips on the glass. It was the same song that had been playing that day in São Paulo when Maria had taken their picture in front of a different jukebox. Through the window, they could see Helena and Alexander in the garden below, deep in conversation. The two old adversaries had found common ground in their shared commitment to honoring Maria's legacy. The garden itself was being transformed into a memorial space, not a place of mourning, but a living testament to the power of truth and reconciliation. Mrs. Rosa joined them, carrying a box of old photographs she'd preserved over the years. As they looked through them together, each image told a story of resilience, of choices made and paths taken. Marcus found one that made him pause, a young Maria Santos standing proudly in front of the original Thompson Industries building, her eyes bright with purpose. She knew, Gabriel signed, having learned enough to communicate with his brother. She knew that someday we would be here, carrying her work forward. Marcus nodded, understanding that their journey wasn't just about exposing the past. It was about building a future worthy of their mother's sacrifice. The Santos Standard wasn't just changing how companies operated. It was changing how people thought about power, responsibility, and the choices that shape our lives. 1 year after the implementation of the Santos Standard, the Thompson Industries building had become a symbol of corporate transformation. The morning sun reflected off its glass facade, now fitted with Marcus's innovative smart windows that made the building more energy efficient and accessible to all employees. In the newly established Ethics and Innovation Center on the ground floor, a group of Santos scholars gathered around a circular table. Among them was a young woman who bore a striking resemblance to Maria, Victor's granddaughter Isabella, who had chosen to join the program despite her family's complicated history. Gabriel led these sessions now, his experience bridging the gap between those who held power and those who sought to reform it. The Santos Standard isn't just about preventing corruption. he explained to the scholars. It's about creating systems that bring out the best in people. The wall behind him displayed real-time data from companies worldwide that had adopted the standard. Each point of light represented a decision made with transparency, a choice. That prioritized ethics over expedience. The pattern looked like a constellation, a map of human integrity spreading across the globe. In his workshop below, Marcus worked with a team of engineers, including several deaf professionals who had been hired as part of the company's new inclusion initiative. They were developing the next generation of the fail-safe system, incorporating artificial intelligence to make it more responsive and adaptable. Alexander often visited the workshop, not to supervise but to learn. His relationship with Marcus had evolved into a partnership of equals, each bringing their own strengths to the shared goal of building something meaningful. Their conversations, once halting and awkward, now flowed naturally through a combination of sign language and technology. "Your mother," Alexander signed one quiet afternoon. "She used to say that machines can't lie. They only reflect the intentions we put into them." Marcus nodded, demonstrating a new feature that could detect patterns of ethical decision-making across an organization. The system didn't just prevent wrongdoing, it actively encouraged and rewarded choices that benefited the broader community. In the memorial garden, Helena sat with Mrs. Rosa, sharing stories about Maria and the lives she had touched. The space had become a gathering place for employees, a reminder that corporate culture could nurture rather than suppress humanity. "Look at them," Mrs. Rosa signed, watching Marcus and Gabriel through the garden's glass walls as they presented their latest innovations to a group of international business leaders. They've become exactly who she hoped they would be. Sarah Chen, now the company's chief ethics officer, joined them with news from the latest board meeting. "The Santos Foundation's influence keeps growing," she reported. "Companies are realizing that ethical business isn't just right, it's profitable." Victor, serving his reduced sentence, had become an unexpected ally in the reform movement. His deep knowledge of corporate manipulation helped strengthen the Santos standard against potential abuse. Through regular video calls with Helena and Gabriel, he contributed to the system's evolution, finding a measure of redemption in helping protect others from the mistakes he had made. As evening approached, the Thompson Industries building transformed into a beacon of light against the darkening sky. In the main atrium, a celebration was underway. The first graduating class of Santos scholars was being honored. The attendees represented a cross-section of society, from former executives seeking redemption to young innovators dreaming of a more equitable future. Marcus stood at the podium, his presence commanding attention without a word. Through an interpreter, he shared his vision for the future, one where technology and humanity worked in harmony, where transparency bred trust rather than fear, where every voice could be heard. Alexander joined him on stage, along with Gabriel and Helena. Together they represented the transformation that was possible when truth and reconciliation replaced revenge and resentment. The old jukebox had been moved to the atrium, restored and modified to create vibrations that allowed everyone, including the deaf attendees, to experience its music. As the celebration continued, Marcus found a quiet moment to visit his mother's memorial in the garden. The plaque bore her image and her words, "The truth is not a weapon to destroy, but a tool to build a better world." Gabriel found him there, and together they watched the city lights twinkle below. Through the garden's glass ceiling, the stars were visible, the same stars that had witnessed their separate journeys to this moment. "She would have loved this," Gabriel signed, gesturing to the celebrating crowd inside. Marcus smiled, thinking of the long path that had led them here, from a deserted road in Brazil to this moment of triumph and possibility. His mother's legacy wasn't just the fail-safe system or the Santos standard. It was the proof that one person's commitment to truth could ripple out to change countless lives. The jukebox in the atrium began playing a new song, its vibrations reaching them through the garden's glass walls. Inside, Alexander was attempting to teach Mrs. Rosa and Helena an old dance step, their laughter visible even if the sound didn't. "Carrie," Sarah Chen was showing a group of Santos scholars how the latest transparency protocols worked, their faces bright with understanding and purpose. As night fell over San Francisco, the Thompson Industries building stood as a testament to transformation, not just of a company or an industry, but of the human heart's capacity for change. The Santos Standard had become more than a corporate policy. It was a blueprint for redemption, a promise that it's never too late to choose a better path. 18 months after the Santos Standard revolutionized corporate governance, the Thompson Industries campus had become a global center for ethical business practices. The autumn sun cast long shadows across the expanded memorial garden, where Marcus sat with a letter from Victor Delgado in his hands. The letter, delivered through Helena, contained something unexpected, a full confession and apology, along with detailed information about the events surrounding Maria's final days. Victor, now in the final months of his reduced sentence, had finally chosen to reveal everything. "Your mother," the letter read, "discovered something I thought was buried forever. She found evidence that Alexander and I had been manipulated by larger forces, international conglomerates that used our rivalry to hide their own corruption. When she threatened to expose everything, they tried to silence her. But Maria was always 3 steps ahead." In his private office, Alexander read his own copy of Victor's confession, his hands trembling slightly. The truth about that time was more complex than even he had known. Maria hadn't just been trying to protect their son. She'd been working to prevent a global financial conspiracy that would have devastated millions of lives. Gabriel found Marcus in the garden, holding his own letter from Victor. The two brothers had developed an uncanny ability to sense when the other needed support. Through sign language, now fluid and natural between them, they shared their grandfather's revelations. "She knew," Gabriel signed. "That's why she created the fail-safe to require both of us. She understood that true change needs both technical precision and human compassion." Helena joined them, carrying a small wooden box that had just arrived from Victor's personal storage. Inside were photographs and documents that filled in the final pieces of Maria's story. Among them was a journal entry dated the day before her final drive. "My dearest sons, if you're reading this, then everything has happened as I hoped. Marcus, your father's gift with machines lives in you, tempered by a wisdom he had yet to learn. Gabriel, though you're not my son by blood, your heart carries the same fire for justice that burns in Marcus. Together, you'll build something greater than any empire. You'll build hope." Sarah Chen appeared with urgent news. The International Corporate Ethics Committee had unanimously voted to adopt the Santos Standard as their global benchmark. Companies worldwide would now be required to implement Maria's transparency protocols. In the main auditorium, Alexander addressed a gathering of corporate leaders and ethics advocates. His voice, once used to command and intimidate, now carried the weight of hard-earned wisdom. "The Santos Standard isn't just about preventing corruption," he explained. "It's about remembering that every business decision affects real lives." Maria understood that technology without humanity is as dangerous as power without responsibility. The presentation screen behind him displayed real-time data from the global implementation of the standard. Each point of light represented a company choosing transparency over secrecy, ethics over expedience. The pattern looked like a constellation of hope spreading across the world. Mrs. Rosa watched from her usual spot in the garden, her eyes bright, with unshed tears. Through the glass walls, she could see Marcus demonstrating his latest innovation, a system that made corporate communications accessible to everyone, regardless of their abilities. In a quiet corner of the auditorium, Isabella, Victor's granddaughter, sat with a group of Santos scholars. She had become a bridge between the old world of corporate power and the new era of ethical business, using her family's experience to teach others about the importance of choosing right over easy. As evening approached, the Thompson Industries campus lit up with a warm glow. The old jukebox, now permanently installed in the memorial garden, played soft music that everyone could feel through the specially designed flooring. It was the same model as the one in São Paulo, where Maria had taken her last photo with Marcus, a circle completed after 2 decades. Gabriel found Alexander standing alone in his old office, looking at the city lights below. The relationship between them had evolved into something unexpected, not father and son, but fellow travelers on a path of redemption. "I've been thinking about legacy," Alexander said quietly. "Not the kind we build with money or power, but the kind Maria created, a legacy of truth and healing." Through the window, they could see Marcus in his workshop, teaching a group of young engineers the principles behind the Santos Standard. His hands moved with the same precision Maria had shown when working with machines, his eyes bright with her determination to make the world better. The sun set over San Francisco Bay, painting the sky in shades of gold and purple. In the memorial garden, Helena sat with Mrs. Rosa, sharing stories about Maria and the future she had envisioned. The woman who had once been Victor's most trusted lieutenant had become the guardian of a different kind of power, the power of truth to heal old wounds and build new bridges. 2 years to the day after Marcus first discovered the truth hidden in the old jukebox, the Thompson Industries campus buzzed with anticipation. The occasion was the official launch of the Global Ethics Initiative, a program that would extend the Santos Standard beyond the corporate world into government and non-profit sectors. The morning light streamed through the memorial garden's glass ceiling where Marcus stood before his mother's portrait. In his hands he held the final piece of her legacy, a letter she had instructed Helena to deliver only when the time was right. "My dearest Marcus," the letter began, "if you're reading this, then the world has begun to change in the ways I dreamed it could. The failsafe was never just about exposing corruption. It was about proving that there's always a better way, if we're brave enough to choose it." Gabriel entered the garden quietly, followed by Alexander and Helena. They had all received their own letters, each containing a piece of Maria's final message. Together, they completed the picture she had spent her last days creating. "The system you've built," Alexander signed to Marcus, his movements fluid after 2 years of dedicated practice. "It goes beyond anything we could have imagined. Maria saw possibilities we couldn't even dream of." Through the garden's glass walls, they could see the auditorium filling with people from around the world, corporate leaders, activists, technologists, and most importantly, ordinary citizens who had been empowered by the Santos Standard to speak truth to power. Victor attended via video conference from the rehabilitation center where he was completing his sentence. His face showed the changes time and reflection had wrought. The sharp edges softened, the calculating gaze replaced by something approaching wisdom. "I've been reviewing the original documents," he told them, his voice carrying a weight of understanding. "Maria's genius wasn't just in the technology she designed. It was in understanding that true change requires both accountability and forgiveness." Sarah Chen coordinated the day's events with her usual efficiency, but there was something different in her manner, a personal investment that went beyond professional duty. She had become part of the extended family that had grown around Maria's legacy. As the ceremony began, Marcus took the stage alongside Gabriel. Through an interpreter, they shared the story that had brought them all to this moment. Not just the dramatic revelations of 2 years ago, but the quiet acts of courage and conviction that had followed. "The Santos Standard isn't just a set of protocols," Gabriel explained to the assembled crowd. "It's a reminder that every system, no matter how complex, ultimately serves human needs and human values." Mrs. Rosa watched from her seat of honor, her eyes bright with tears of joy. The frightened child she had rescued from a deserted road had grown into a man who was changing the world, not through force or fear, but through understanding and innovation. Isabella, now a leading voice in corporate ethics, presented the results of the first global impact study. The Santos Standard hadn't just prevented corruption, it had created new opportunities for collaboration and growth, proving that ethical business could also be profitable business. As the day drew to a close, the Thompson Industries campus glowed with warm light. The old jukebox played softly in the memorial garden, its vibrations carrying through the special flooring that Marcus had designed to make music accessible to everyone. Alexander found himself back in his old office, now transformed into a learning center for future business leaders. The view of San Francisco Bay remained the same, but his perspective had shifted fundamentally. She knew he said to Helena, who had joined him by the window. Even back then, Maria knew that the real challenge wasn't exposing the truth, it was helping people find the courage to embrace it. In the garden below, Marcus and Gabriel sat with Mrs. Rosa, sharing memories and dreams for the future. The brothers had developed their own sign language shortcuts, a private vocabulary that blended their different worlds into something new and hopeful. The sun set over the bay, casting long shadows across the campus. In offices and boardrooms around the world, the Santos Standard continued its quiet work, transforming how people thought about power, responsibility, and the possibility of change. Maria's final letter, shared among those who had loved her, ended with a simple truth. The greatest power we have is not in what we can take from others, but in what we can build together. The future belongs to those who dare to imagine it better. The 5th anniversary of the Santos Standard's implementation dawned with unexpected news. Victor Delgado had been granted early release for his extraordinary cooperation in corporate reform efforts. The morning papers carried his first public statement in years, a thoughtful reflection on power, redemption, and the legacy of Maria Santos. In his newly established workshop at the Thompson Innovation Center, Marcus paused his work on the latest generation of ethical AI systems to read the news. Through the reinforced glass walls, he could see the sprawling campus that had grown from the original Thompson Industries building, now a global hub for ethical business practices and technological innovation. Gabriel entered, carrying a thick folder of applications for the upcoming Santos Scholars Program. The initiative had grown beyond their wildest expectations, with thousands of applicants from around the world seeking to learn the principles Maria had established. "Have you seen this?" Gabriel signed, showing Marcus another article. The United Nations had just adopted the Santos Standard as the global benchmark for institutional transparency. What had begun as a corporate reform movement had evolved into a worldwide revolution in accountability and ethical governance. Alexander found them there, his movement slower with age, but his mind as sharp as ever. 5 years of signing had made him fluent, allowing him to communicate directly with his son without intermediaries. "Your mother," he signed. "She would have loved seeing this." The 3 men moved to the Memorial Garden, where Helena was hosting a gathering of international ethics officers. The garden had expanded over the years, becoming a living museum of corporate transformation. Each plant, each pathway told a story of change and renewal. Mrs. Rosa, now in her 80s but still vibrant, sat in her customary spot by the restored jukebox. She had become a beloved figure at the Innovation Center, her quiet wisdom helping guide new generations of reformers and innovators. Sarah Chen, recently promoted to Global Director of Ethics Implementation, joined them with the latest data. The Santos Standard hadn't just prevented corruption, it had fundamentally changed how people thought about business and society. "Look at these numbers," she explained, displaying a holographic chart. Companies that fully adopted the standard aren't just more ethical, they're more profitable, more innovative, and more resilient to market challenges. A familiar face appeared on the garden's communication screen, Victor, making his first post-release appearance via video call. Time and reflection had transformed him. The calculating businessman was gone, replaced by someone who understood the true cost of unchecked ambition. "I've been thinking about choices," he told them, his voice carrying the weight of hard-earned wisdom. "About how a single decision can ripple through decades, touching lives we never meant to touch." Maria understood that. She saw the connections we were all too blind to see. Isabella, who had followed in Gabriel's footsteps to become a leading voice in corporate ethics, presented her latest research on the global impact of the Santos Standard. The data showed something remarkable, a generational shift in how people viewed power and responsibility. "It's not just about preventing wrongdoing anymore," she explained. "The standard has created a new kind of leadership culture, one based on empathy and long-term thinking, rather than quick profits and personal gain." As evening approached, Marcus demonstrated his latest innovation, a system that could predict ethical challenges before they emerged, allowing organizations to address potential issues proactively rather than reactively. The technology bore His mother's philosophical fingerprints, elegant, compassionate, and deeply human. In a quiet moment, Alexander found himself alone in the garden with Helena. Sometimes, he confessed, I wonder what would have happened if I'd listened to Maria all those years ago, if I'd been brave enough to choose truth over power. Helena's response was gentle but firm. She knew you would understand eventually. That's why she built a system that could wait, not just for technology to catch up, but for hearts to change. The setting sun painted the garden in shades of gold, its light catching the inscription on Maria's memorial. Truth is a seed that grows in its own time. Below these words, a new addition had been made. The Santos Standard, building bridges between what is and what could be. Marcus and Gabriel sat together by the jukebox, feeling its vibrations through the special flooring. They had grown into their roles not just as brothers, but as custodians of their mother's vision. The legacy she had left them wasn't just a system or a standard. It was a way of seeing the world, of understanding how small acts of courage could grow into movements that changed everything. The seasons had turned many times since that fateful night when a young boy was abandoned on a Brazilian highway. Now, on a crisp autumn morning, Marcus stood at the podium of the newly inaugurated Maria Santos Global Ethics Center, preparing to address a worldwide audience on the 10th anniversary of the Santos Standard. The building itself was a testament to transformation, a stunning blend of sustainable architecture and universal design, where every feature served both beauty and accessibility. Through its transparent walls, the San Francisco skyline stretched toward the horizon, a vista that had witnessed a decade of remarkable change. In the front row, Gabriel sat beside Helena, both of them battle-scarred veterans of the corporate reform movement they had helped create. Next to them was Alexander, his hair now completely white, his bearing still proud but softened by years of reconciliation and understanding. Victor had made the journey from his retirement home in Brazil to attend in person, his first public appearance since his release. He sat quietly beside Mrs. Rosa, an arrangement that would have seemed impossible a decade ago. Time and truth had worn away the sharp edges of old enmities, leaving behind a shared commitment to something larger than themselves. As Marcus began his address, his signs were translated simultaneously into dozens of languages, reaching audiences around the globe. The Santos Standard had evolved far beyond its origins as a corporate accountability system. It had become a framework for social transformation, a way of thinking about power and responsibility that transcended cultural boundaries. 10 years. Sagas he signed, with Sarah Chen providing voice interpretation. We discovered that transparency alone isn't enough. Real change requires something more, the courage to look honestly at ourselves and the compassion to help others do the same. The screens behind him displayed a living map of the Standard's global impact. Thousands of organizations, millions of decisions, countless lives touched by the ripple effects of ethical choice. But the numbers told only part of the story. Isabella, now a leading figure in international ethics law, presented the human side of these changes. She shared stories of whistleblowers protected, communities empowered, and corrupt systems transformed. The Santos Standard hadn't just prevented wrongdoing, it had created space for integrity to flourish. In the memorial garden, the old jukebox had been joined by a forest of new technology, each piece designed to make information and opportunity accessible to everyone. Marcus's innovations had sparked a revolution in inclusive design, proving that ethical technology could also be beautiful and intuitive. Gabriel's work with the Santos Foundation had expanded to include conflict resolution and reconciliation programs worldwide. His personal journey from unwitting pawn to ethical leader had become a case study in transformation, teaching others that it's never too late to choose a different path. As the day's formal ceremonies wound down, the core group gathered in the garden for a more private commemoration. Helena produced a small package that had recently arrived from Brazil, the last of Maria's hidden messages, timed to be delivered on this anniversary. The letter inside spoke not of past wrongs but of future possibilities. "My dearest family," it read, "if you're reading this, then the seeds we planted have grown into something beautiful. Remember that every system, no matter how perfect, is only as good as the hearts of those who use it. Keep building, keep growing, keep believing in the power of truth to heal." Alexander's hands trembled as he signed to Marcus. "Your mother saw something in all of us that we couldn't see in ourselves. She built a system not just to catch wrongdoing, but to nurture right-doing." The setting sun cast long shadows through the garden's trees, each planted to commemorate a milestone in the Standard's evolution. Mrs. Rosa, now in her 9th decade but still sharp as ever, watched the younger generation with quiet pride. The frightened boy she had rescued had grown into a man who changed the world, not through force but through understanding. As evening fell, the center's lights came on gradually, designed to be gentle on sensitive eyes while still illuminating the path forward. The jukebox played softly, its vibrations carrying through the special flooring that Marcus had perfected over the years. Victor stood slowly, addressing the group for the first time that day. "I spent decades believing that power came from what you could take from others," he said quietly. "Maria showed us that real power comes from what you can build together." The night air was filled with the gentle sounds of the garden's fountains, designed by Marcus to create patterns that could be felt as well as heard. Above them, the stars emerged one by one, witnesses to a story of transformation that had begun with one woman's courage to imagine a better way. As the 20th anniversary of the Santos Standard approached, the Maria Santos Global Ethics Center had become a beacon of hope recognized worldwide. On this particular morning, Marcus stood in his mother's memorial garden, watching the sunrise, paint the sky in brilliant hues of pink and gold. The garden had grown into a living testament to transformation, each plant and pathway telling part of their extraordinary journey. 2 decades had passed since that fateful night when truth began to emerge from shadows. The old jukebox, now a cherished historical artifact, still held its place of honor, surrounded by the latest generations of Marcus's innovations in accessible technology. Its presence served as a bridge between past and future, between what was and what could be. Gabriel approached, his steps quiet on the specialized flooring. The years had added silver to his temples, but his eyes still carried the same determination that had helped him choose truth over deception so long ago. "The delegates are arriving," he signed, his movements fluid with years of practice. "Are you ready?" Today marked more than just an anniversary. It was the official launch of the Santos Initiative for Global Transformation, a program that would extend their mother's principles beyond business and government into every aspect of human interaction. Representatives from over 100 nations had gathered to witness this new chapter in their story. Alexander, now in his 80s but still sharp-minded, watched from his wheelchair as the garden filled with people whose lives had been touched by the Santos Standard. Each face in the crowd represented a story of change, of choices made in favor of truth and compassion over power and greed. Helena, elegant in her advanced years, sat beside Victor, who had become an unexpected ambassador for corporate reform after his release. Time had softened their old animosities, replacing them with a shared commitment to protecting and expanding Maria's legacy. Mrs. Rosa, now in her 90s, held court among a group of young Santos scholars. Though frail in body, her spirit remained undiminished. The children she had once protected had grown into leaders who were reshaping the world, and she had lived to see it all. Isabella, who had succeeded Gabriel as head of the Santos Foundation, presented the latest global impact reports. The Standard hadn't just transformed business practices, it had fundamentally altered how humanity approached questions of ethics and responsibility. "The numbers tell an incredible story," she explained, displaying holographic charts that filled the garden air. "But the real impact can't be measured in statistics. It's in the millions of daily decisions made by people who now believe in the possibility of ethical prosperity." Sarah Chen, her years of dedication evident in her bearing, coordinated the day's events with her characteristic precision. Under her leadership, the implementation team had grown into a global network of change agents, each trained in the principles Maria had established so long ago. As Marcus took the podium to address the gathering, His hands moved with the grace and authority of someone who had learned to turn silence into strength. The garden's special surfaces carried the vibrations of his message to everyone present, regardless of their ability to hear. 20 years ago, he signed, with multiple interpreters translating into dozens of languages. Our mother showed us that true change begins not with forcing people to do right, but with making it easier for them to be their best selves. The Gabi Santos standard was never just about preventing wrongdoing. It was about nurturing the human capacity for good. The screens throughout the garden displayed images from their journey: the old Thompson Industries building, the first implementation of the fail-safe, the gradual spread of the standard across continents. Each milestone represented countless individual choices to embrace truth over convenience, ethics over expedience. Alexander rose slowly from his wheelchair, supported by Gabriel, to add his own words. Maria saw possibilities we couldn't imagine. She understood that real power lies not in what we can take from others, but in what we can build together. As the sun reached its zenith, Marcus unveiled the latest evolution of his mother's vision: a global network of ethics centers, each designed to serve its local community while connecting to the larger whole. The technology was impressive, but the true innovation lay in how it empowered people to make ethical choices in their daily lives. In a quiet moment between ceremonies, the core family gathered around the old jukebox. Its music, felt through the garden's special flooring, seemed to carry echoes of all the moments that had led them here: the pain of separation, the courage of truth-telling, the joy of reconciliation. Mrs. Rosa, her eyes bright with unshed tears, signed what they were all feeling. Maria would be so proud not just of what you've built, but of who you've become. As evening approached, Marcus and Gabriel stood together at the garden's highest point, overlooking the city their mother had loved. The Santos standard had grown far beyond their original dreams, touching lives they would never know, inspiring changes they would never see. The 20th anniversary celebration ended as it had begun, with family gathered in the garden, sharing stories and dreams for the future. The old jukebox played softly, its vibrations carrying through the ground like a heartbeat, reminding them that every ending is just another beginning in disguise. Above them, the first stars appeared in the darkening sky, witnesses to a story that had begun with one woman's courage and grown into a global movement for change. Maria's final message, preserved in the garden's central memorial, seemed to glow in the gathering dusk. The greatest power we have is not in what we can prevent, but in what we can inspire. Keep building, keep growing, keep believing in the possibility of a better world. And in that moment, surrounded by the living legacy of truth and transformation, they knew that their story would continue to inspire long after they were gone, echoing through generations like music from an old jukebox, felt even in silence.